Let's get started. My name is Ruth Rumack, and I am the Executive Director of Education at Ruth Rumack's Learning Space. We are a center for academic support in that we work with students one-on-one. We create strategic curriculum for those students, and we have a whole host of students in terms of their needs. We work with kids that have learning challenges, ADD, ADHD, some students on the autism spectrum. We work with gifted students, and we work with the students that have a wide range of abilities in between. So really, we work with everything from remedial through to enrichment, and we make sure that every lesson is personalized for that child. When we're face-to-face, this is, pre-COVID, we have a very kinesthetic, multi-sensory, multimodal approach, which means that we want to get kids moving and active and making sure that their brain and their body is connected in order to really understand the learning that they are doing. Since we have moved to the online format, I have to say that our staff have done an incredible job of really retaining that type of engagement and the dynamic lessons that we provide online, which it was no small feat. It was definitely a Herculean feat. And what we have done is taken all of the aspects of our face-to-face lessons and found a way to make them engaging and dynamic in the class, outside of the classroom and in the one-on-one online sessions. So I'm going to introduce Sabrina Bain. She is my co-host this evening. She is one of our math and science experts, and she is going to talk to us a little bit later as we get more into the presentation. She's got lots of great ideas and wonderful things to say, so I'm sure you're going to enjoy her adding to the conversation as well. I'm going to, well, let's move on. Let's get started. We've waited long enough. So math-phobia is a real thing. And math-phobia is something that is, it's not something to be sloughed off. It's something that individuals actually experience and can experience even physical pain with the thought of math or having to sit and do math. One of the things that I like these statistics that 38% of people use basic math 1 to 2 times a week, and 29% use algebra and formulas 1 to 2 times a week, whereas 4% use advanced math 1 to 2 times per week. Now, the thing about that statistic is 38% use basic math skills, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. And those are the basics that we teach our kids starting very young, all the way through into, even middle school. And then as we get to more advanced things, we move through the junior high and into high school range. But what we see from that statistic is that those very basic pieces are extremely important. And when we have confidence in ourselves and our math ability, we are able to use those different pieces of basic math in a much more fluid and fluent way. And that's the basis of our talk tonight, which is how do we take kids from that state of phobia to a state of confidence? And we have lots of strategies and tips and things that we can provide for you as parents to practice at home. And maybe you at home are actually feeling that fear of math and that pain that comes along with looking at a math question or being put on the spot to have to do some math operations. So there is anxiety around math, and the idea about what we want to talk about is that the anxiety is not just in the children. It can be in parents as well, and even in the teachers that are teaching the math. And this presents its own issue because, of course, when you have a primary teacher or a junior teacher who is teaching math as part of their core curriculum, and they have anxiety with math, it's definitely going to impact how they teach that course and the confidence with which they come to the table and what your child is going to absorb from them as well. We'll talk about that a little later. All right, let's look at the next slide. So let's talk about what math phobia actually is. Well, there's phobia, there's anxiety. We can call it, avoidance or procrastination along with the math. But really, it's an idea of anything that makes you avoid doing the math, feeling uncomfortable with it, anything that may make you feel unsure about your answers or your process. And the most interesting thing I find about math phobia or math anxiety is it has nothing to do with your math ability. And it's often correlated more with perceived inability, which means that when you think you can't do it, you prove that you can't do it time and time again, because in some way your brain has set yourself up to believe that you can't, and therefore you can't. So it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, and difficult to figure out what comes first, whether it is a true inability or it is a perceived inability. And we're going to talk about that in the next slide. Moving on. So let's talk about math phobia and some of the myths that surround math phobia. You'll often hear people saying, adults and children, like, oh, I just don't have the math gene. I'm not a math person. Oh, you're good at math. That's your talent. I just don't have that talent. A lot of individuals will give excuses why they can't do the math. Oh, my father was never good at math. My mother was never good at math. It runs in our family. Or just the avoidance, which is basically ignoring it, pushing it to the side, sweeping it under the rug, and pretending that it's not there. And then there's the fear. And the fear can be very, very real. It can actually, I've seen individuals staring at a math question that they are capable of doing start to sweat, start to even shake, or start to get really nauseous or feel ill. And then there's a resignation, which is, well, I don't need this anyway. It's not important. It's not really necessary. And all of those things on the math phobia side, those behaviors are what we might see in a child. But we want to look at the other side, which is kids or adults, individuals who have math confidence. So what do people with math confidence look like? How do they behave? Well, they may struggle in the math. They may have some issues, in that some questions are harder than others, but they persevere. They're not going to give up easily. They're going to go back to what they know and build on from there. They look at doing math as a skill. They may be curious in that if they don't get the answer right the first time, they'll go back and figure it out step by step. And as I said, that willingness to try and that perseverance really categorizes math confidence. So on the one hand, we have either resignation or fear or avoidance. And on the math confidence side, we have that idea of curiosity and really like digging deeper, peeling it back, using all of the knowledge that you have in order to figure it out. All right, let's take a look at the next slide. So there is a real disability, math disability, called dyscalculia. And that is a diagnosed learning challenge where it is categorized by difficulty in decoding, encoding, decoding meaning breaking the information down, encoding meaning putting it back together in the way that it's supposed to be aligned, and memorizing and processing numbers. So dyscalculia is something that only affects 3 to 6% of the population, and it impedes the acquisition of math facts and the comprehension of math. So it is a real thing, and it is diagnosable, but it only occurs in a very small percentage of the population, which would lead you to question, well, then why are so many people afraid of math and so many people stop their math enhancement or their math enrichment or enjoyment at such an early age? And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Let's look at the next slide. So here is the conundrum, which is dyscalculia on one side, math phobia on the other side. And then as a Venn diagram, as a math workshop, we have to put the Venn diagram in there because it's so appropriate talking about math. But that middle part is what is shared by both people with math phobia and people who have been diagnosed with dyscalculia. And we see that in the middle range, they both find homework difficult. It's laborious. It's very challenging. It's hard. They have an expectation of failure. They feel that they're going to fail even before they've started. And we also see the poor marks on tests even after preparation. Now, on the dyscalculia side, on the disability side, we can see that the poor marks are generally because of misunderstanding, of not understanding the process, not understanding or remembering the steps of the process, or how to get to the other end, or what the end result is even supposed to look like. And you also have on that disability side worrying about the test because you don't understand the material. On the math phobia side, we have poor marks because perhaps of test anxiety and worrying about that test excessively, even though you do understand the material and you are capable and you have proven that you are capable of doing those types of questions with accuracy in other environments. So on the two sides, one is that real ability to do it, capable of doing it, but the anxiety takes over. And on the other side, there is a brain-based wiring difference in terms of how we understand numbers and how we are coming to the process of doing the math. Let's look at the next slide. Now, the ways that math phobia manifests, and as parents, or perhaps as a person who is feeling a fear of math themselves, you may have experienced these things with your children or for yourself. A withdrawal, so just moving, pulling yourself back, not perhaps participating in class, not putting your hand up, not asking a question, not following through with an answer that you don't understand. There's a definite nervousness or anxiety or fear that comes with the math phobia. Passive behavior, which is just kind of throwing your hands up and, just not gonna engage. A defensiveness, we see this in students often, or I might even see it in my own children sometimes, where, they get angry, they get mad, they will really get physical, and their behavior escalates as soon as you bring the math out because of that fear or that anxiety. There's a lot of embarrassment, when you're in a larger classroom and it looks like everybody else around you is getting it and you're the one you perceive that you're not getting it, or you're the only one that's not getting it. That's a real awful feeling. And, as teachers and as educators, we want to make sure that everybody in our group classes or in our one-to-one classes is feeling comfortable and is feeling safe in that math environment. And, we do that by getting to know our kids. But it's also a matter of how we present the information. Let's see. We have something in our chat box. I'm so glad that you just used it. Let's see what it says. It says the math phobia manifest seems to be the same list in other subjects. Absolutely, absolutely. And I would agree that, that fear and anxiety, it's fear and anxiety, and it manifests itself in many ways across the board. So, if you have a fear of reading or reading in front of other people, public speaking maybe, you're going to see the same types of things exhibited. You're right, it's no different. Panic can also come up when somebody is afraid of something, and that panic can look like a meltdown. It can look like sometimes in my kitchen with my own daughter who's in grade 5, an absolute, first it's a meltdown, then there are tears, then there is avoidance, and then running away from the table. Then there's getting distracted by something else, having to find the perfect pencil to get this work done. But in the end, what we try and do is just breathe. Just breathe through it, take a deep breath, get her to recognize that, well, you know what? I can do this, and I can take it one step at a time, and we're going to talk about the techniques in a little while, but it's on the parent or the adult side of things, it's really about recognizing when your child is in that zone and trying to help them out of it without taking it personally and without losing your patience, because that's, of course, the most difficult task as a parent when we're working with kids, especially when we're feeling anxious about it as well. So let's take a look at the next slide. So we want to talk about a mindset shift. I have to say that really slowly. Basically shifting our mindset. And for those individuals who look at math as something to be feared or that they are uncomfortable with, we want to switch the way that we think about it to a growth mindset, in that you may not understand this at this moment, you may not understand it yet, but you will get there. And if you have confidence that you will get there, and you have some experience from the past of not understanding something and then getting to the point where you do get it, and you can recall that experience, that's going to help you remember it for the next time and get there in the next moment of uncertainty. Let's look at the next slide. So these are just a couple of myths that we hear floating around, or that are sort of floating around society, that men are better at math than women. False. That is not true. Research has failed to show any difference between the sexes in math ability. What we do see actually in research studies with young children as young as grade 2 is that even as young as grade 2, girls will start to perceive that they are not as good as at math as their male counterparts or cohort. But what the test results show is that the girls' anxiety, math anxiety or math confidence is, let's put it this way, is much lower than the boys, but their math ability is actually higher than the boys in some studies that I have read, or at least on par. So what they're perceiving as an inability is actually just lack of confidence. And they're completely capable of doing it. It's just how they view themselves and what perception they bring to it. So it's very interesting to me that as young as grade 2, we're already kind of feeding into this idea that boys can do math and girls can't. And that has a significant impact for our STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math programs in later life. But also just in the path that girls take in terms of what courses they take in high school that then lead them on to the options that they have in university. So, not that is my biggest goal is to make more girls feel confident in math. I want to really spread that to everybody. It doesn't matter whether you're a girl or boy, but it's really about feeling confident in the work that you're doing. So some of these other math myths is that there is a best way to do a math problem and that there's only one way to do it, which is also false. Math is beautiful that way in that there are many ways to solve a problem, just like the rest of life, and there are many ways to get to that answer. And so in school, sometimes a teacher will only teach one way, and that one way doesn't work for everybody in the classroom. And if they have alternatives, too many alternatives kind of make a person feel uneasy too because they don't know which way to turn. But if one method isn't working, we know we can always bring another method into the situation and help that student out. The next one is some people have a math mind and others don't. Not true. We know that people generally are very capable. It's just how they're being taught. And again, the confidence that they have. Another one that I love is it's bad to count on your fingers. And in fact, counting on your fingers actually indicates an understanding of arithmetic, that there is some type of representation to things. And it's a visual representation. It can be a tactile representation. You could use counters or objects, and we'll talk about that later. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think where it looks like it's bad is when a child is struggling in math and they don't have the automaticity, they don't have that fast recall of the facts that allows them to be more fluent in their math. And so a parent will say, oh, my kid in grade 6 is still counting on their fingers. And my response to that is, well, two things. Maybe that's the way their brain works best, that it helps them to tactilely or to kinesthetically work it out or to visually work it out. But at the same time, it probably goes back to a lack of confidence in their basic facts, and in which case, if we can strengthen their basic facts, they won't need to count on their fingers going forward. Those good in math do problems quickly in their heads. Not so true, because even math professors will look at example problems before teaching them in class. There are some people who really have that incredible skill to be able to see the numbers and to be able to work with them just in their heads. But for the most part, most of the population needs to have it written down. And in fact, in the school setting, we encourage kids to write it down because that way we can see their process. And if they don't show their process, then we cannot understand how they've gotten from point A to point D when in fact there were many steps in between. One of the things that I say to our high school students, especially kids who are good at math or who are fast with their math facts, they are losing marks on their tests for not filling in their process, not showing their steps. And even though some of those kids who can zip through it at the early stages of math, as you get more complicated, of course, you don't have the practice of showing your steps, and therefore you're getting to more complicated questions and you're not able to follow your own process, in which case if you've made a mistake, you won't know where you've made your mistake. All right, let's move on. Any questions so far? Anything that you want to throw out to the chat? I would be happy to answer things as we go along. We also will have time at the end, and we might even ask you a couple of questions yourselves. So I'm hoping that we get some discussion going in the chat box as well. How many people, you can just, put a check mark or a yes, a Y in the chat box. How many people have heard of the growth mindset versus a fixed mindset? Anybody out there? Couple people maybe. We'll give you a moment to enter that. I'll tell you a little bit about growth mindset. This is not so much a strategy, but it's a way of thinking that we really embrace at Ruth Math Learning Space, because we strongly believe that even if you don't know something and you don't feel confident with it and you don't understand it at this moment, our brains are capable of figuring it out in the future. And the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset starts from the idea that I don't know this yet, I will figure it out, versus I'll never know this, I'm never going to be good at this, it's never going to work for me. It's a very fixed mindset, and it really shuts things down. When you have a growth mindset and you can practice the confidence of knowing that even if you don't know it right now, you will gain that information and that confidence as you go forward, it really helps to kind of take that anxiety away, and it helps to make sure that people are feeling confident about what they're doing. So we've got a raised hand. I don't know whether that means to ask a question, or maybe you're raising your hand to say, yep, you know about growth mindset. Excellent. All right, let's take a look at, we've got something in the chat. Let's see. Quick question. Yes. What is your quick question? Maybe we can give you, turn your mic on. Go ahead.
Hi there, how are you?
Good, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm good. Everything sounds great. I just had a quick question about, even if everything you were just explaining, and he really, really insists saying, I really don't want to do it, I'm not doing it. Like, how can I even have him coming to the table and attending the homework or the exercise? Which option or suggestion?
We are going to give you a whole ton of suggestions a little bit later on. In just a few slides, we're going to get to that, which is giving you some really concrete strategies, ways to make it fun, ways to make it engaging. And also, my suggestion up front is you want to start with very small spots. And, sounded quiet when you were further. Okay, I'm getting closer. Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yes.
Good. You want to start with some very small incremental pieces at a level that your child feels comfortable. So you want to basically stack the deck for them as opposed to against them, and give them as many small successes as you possibly can. And as you give them more successes, they see that they can do it, and it's not so hard and it's not so taxing or laborious. A person is going to want to come back to that activity because they feel good about it. And even to practice the same concept many, many times in different ways, and we'll show you some different games and things that you can do, that will build that confidence and build that interest and build that curiosity. And the more a child has success and feels that win, like, woohoo, I did it, even if it's very small, the more they're going to come back and want to do more. Okay. We're gonna come back with more questions for you, or more suggestions for you in just a moment. So let's move on to the next slide. Next slide. All right. Here we go. Practical ways to prevent learned helplessness. And this idea of learned helplessness is that giving up. Like, I can't do it. There's no way that I can do it, and I'm just going to throw up my hands and hope that it goes away. One of the things that we want to talk about is modeling the problem-solving process. So as educators and as parents, as a parent, I often will talk out loud how I'm thinking about doing this problem. So when I'm working on a grade 5 problem with a student, I might say, oh, this is a really interesting, a story problem where you have John went to the store and he bought 16 eggs and he had 4 friends and he had to divide them equally. I think to myself, oh, well, that's interesting. Well, what is my big number? What is my total here? I might circle that in the question. Or what are they asking you in this question? What am I trying to find? So we have a whole checklist of things that we go through that is a systematic and structured approach to problem solving, for example, or different approaches depending on the type of math that we're doing. So modeling the problem solving method by speaking out loud and speaking your thoughts is a really great way of sharing your process with your child without giving them the answer. So you're also asking them kind of leading questions to try and get the right information. Remind them of their own perseverance, which is, reminding them of a time where they had to work really hard to get something, and it should have nothing to do with math. Like, remember when you first took the training wheels off your bike and how tricky it was to stay balanced, but after, a full day of practicing, you got it and you were amazing, and then you had it forever, and every time you jump on your bike, you're smooth sailing, or something else. Let me mention also that you're going to get a handout after this webinar. We're going to send it to you with guided questions and question starters that you can use right away, along with a whole bunch of activities and lots of good resources. So don't worry that you need to take notes on everything we say. We're going to send you lots of information tomorrow. The idea to really emphasize the process over the product. It's not always about getting the right answer, although of course that's important. But if a child has gone through the proper steps and they are able to understand the process and the outcome of the process, if they have made a calculation error in between, that happens, but it's more about understanding that they know how to get to that answer. And again, really demonstrate patience. As a parent, you really need to take a deep breath when your child is having a moment and let them have that moment and remind them that, you know what, they can do it. We've got this. Not to worry. Take a break, take a breath, go get a snack, go get some water, and then come back and try it again a little bit later. Don't hold the pencil, which, as a parent, you're just like, give that to me. I'll show you how to do it. And you want to take that pencil and run with it. But in fact, if you do that, your child is never going to learn the process on their own. And again, that does encourage that learned helplessness as though someone else is going to do it for you. Productive struggle. And that is, it's a balance between setting up a situation where your child may have to go through a bit of struggle. It may be challenging. There may be some bumps in the road, but that you are beside them or you are encouraging them, and the fact that they will eventually get to the spot where they need to be is important. So too much struggle is going to push somebody backwards and they're going to feel like they can't do it even further. But some productive struggle, which is scaffolding. In education, we talk about scaffolding, which is like steps, really clear chunks that we just take one little piece at a time, and when you get to that next level, then you can add the next piece of information and the next and the next. Oh, I see it's sunset and my sun is coming through the window. And of course, asking those guiding questions, which you'll have a sheet for tomorrow, which will give you some good prompts in terms of what to ask. Well, like, for example, what kind of information do we need here? What do you think the question is asking us? Oh, where do you think we would find out the total number of children at the game, for example? So we're asking leading questions or guiding questions that will help focus the child's attention to where they need to be. All right, let's move on. If you've got any more questions, please put them in the chat. Making math relevant, fun, and accessible. All right, this is my time to hand it over to Sabrina. And as I said, Sabrina is one of our learning specialists at Ruth and Max Learning Space, a marvelous math teacher with tons of creative ideas, and she's going to share with us some of the things that she does as well. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. So I'm going to talk specifically about making math relevant, answering that question, when will I ever use this in my life? Also making it fun and making it accessible for different levels. So first, let's go to the next slide. So this question, I get this a lot, and I even find it hard sometimes to think of an answer in the moment. So I think it's helpful to explain to kids that math is not about problems on a worksheet. Math is about making sense of the world using numbers, analyzing data, and really, no matter your career or your lifestyle, if you think about it that way, we all use math. So I'd like you to just take a moment and think to yourself, how do I use math in my everyday life? And if you'd like to share, place it in the chat box. We'd love to hear your thoughts. But I'll go through some of these examples on the slide while you're thinking about that and sharing. So in daily life, I would say playing sports, especially hockey. If you think about the angles that you're shooting against the wall and how to get it into the net, plotting a garden, to consider, the area of the plants and which plants you're going to grow in which spot and how much area you need for the seeds that you're actually planting. Furniture layout, making a blueprint, art and photography. There's actually, I see calculating interest on loans or investments. Art and photography, there's actually a lot of math in art. People think that they're mutually exclusive, but there's a lot of measurement in art, particularly in things like kinetic sculptures where you have to use Arduinos or mini computers to make different components move. Kitchen design, also lots of measurement there and geometry. Party planning, geometry with decorating the room. You need to figure out how much food to serve so that all your guests are satisfied. Also taking out a loan. As a cashier, yes, making change and figuring out how many payments you need to make in order to pay off the loan, how often you should make those payments, what's the interest, how much more money do you spend when you wait a longer amount of time and let the interest build. All of those things are using math. Adjusting recipe sizes, we'll talk about this one in more detail later. Converting currency when traveling abroad, calculating the distance on a road trip, that considers speed, it considers elapsed time. These are all math concepts. Budgeting finances, so making sure that you are sticking to a budget and using percentages to figure out what percent of your income you want to spend on different things. And home mortgage, similar to the loan and budgeting. So this is really helpful to just talk to your kids about how you use math, even though maybe you're not a quote math person, even though we said that's a myth, or maybe you're not a math teacher, but you still use math in your everyday life, and they will too when they grow up. And the career side, there's a lot of careers that use math. Video game design. I think a lot of kids think that video game design is just the coolest career, and really there is tons of great math in it. You have to design a 3D environment, and the fundamentals of that virtual space are using polygons to represent objects. Architects design buildings using measurements and dimensions and geometry. And farmers, they calculate their multiple variables in order to meet their crop yields. Medical technology, when a surgeon creates, or when someone creates a medical instrument for a surgeon, they have to consider so many different things. They have to consider materials, cost, the specific dimensions to achieve the purpose of that technology. That's all math. Robotics and engineering kind of go together. And these are related to the medical tech because variables, equations are used to design components for machines. For space travel, I would say designing models to scale in order to analyze planets. Obviously, we can't look at a whole planet at once. We have to build a model and build it to scale that uses math. Dietitians and nutritionists, they have to use percentages, fractions to determine, how many calories should a person consume in order to meet their goal weight. And they have to consider different variables, the person's gender, the person's age, the person's activity level, all of that relates to algebra. Air traffic controllers, they have to use geometry to map out flight plans, and especially to, use algebra to ensure that two planes aren't in the same position at the same time.
Very important.
Yeah. Oceanographers, meteorologists, they're studying ocean circulation, movement of currents, weather. Jewelers use measurement and ratio to, build beautifully designed jewelry, and carpentry is similar to the jewelry design in that they're using measurement and precision to creating furniture, kitchen cupboards, etc.
And Ashley says a chef as well, which is absolutely correct.
Yes. We're going to talk more about cooking. My personal passion when it comes to helping kids realize math is very important. Okay, next slide, please. So now let's talk a little bit about how to make math time fun. And I'm talking specifically about schoolwork. So obviously math is more than worksheets and activities, but the reality is that your kid has to do worksheets and activities for school. So how can you make math time at home fun and not stressful or stressful for both of you, your child and you. So I'm going to talk about three things: making it different, giving permission to take a break, and catering to your child's learning style. So for making it different, we do this a lot at our LS. We don't demand that kids work at a desk. We let them be comfortable. So if a student is going to be more productive by laying on the floor, we're going to lay on the floor on our bellies, and we're going to work on a paper on the floor, or we're going to sit under the desk, or they're going to do one problem at one end of the hallway, and they're going to run and do the next problem at the other end of the hallway. Just being flexible to allow them to get out of the monotony of working at a desk. I think that breaks it up a little bit and can really help. Doing the work on a whiteboard with a marker, it's really great for math, because erasing a whiteboard marker mark is a lot less strenuous than erasing with a pencil. And it seems like a small thing, but it really can break the flow when a student has to redo a whole problem or erase a whole part, and they just get frustrated. So if they're working on a whiteboard, for whatever reason, it just relieves a lot of that tension. They can just wipe it away with their hand, and it's just quick. And making mistakes is actually a part of learning math and that productive struggle. And so making that more normal, I think, is always helpful. I'd also say giving permission to take a break. Ruth talked about before how patience is really important, and it's okay to take a short break between each problem, or to say, you know what, we're going to come back to this after fill in the blank, after whatever you feel like would get your child in the right headspace. And you may be surprised by how much more work you actually get done doing it this way. And I would say for me, I've seen that a lot of students benefit from just, let's throw a basketball in between each question. Let's play soccer, and when you score on me, you do 2 questions. When I score on you, you do 3 questions. Like, let's just break it up, and they all of a sudden, they forget they're doing math. They think we're just playing soccer. And then also I'd say catering to your child's learning style. So incorporating movement is huge. Most kids love to move. And I would say if your child is a kinetic learner, even better, talk about it while working. If your student is one of those kids who, or if your child is one of those kids who talks to themselves as they're working something out, chances are they're probably an auditory learner. And it's really helpful to talk about the process. Maybe you talk about it with them before they get started, or you have them explain it to you. That self-narration actually helps a lot of my high school students catch their mistakes. So building that when they're young is so helpful. And then draw and use visuals. If they're a visual learner, if they're tactile, this is great. So if you have any questions, just put it in the chat box. Feel free to put it in there as I'm speaking.
I'm going to add a little bit to that, which is, you know, in my household, we have two kids. We've got a grade 5 daughter who is 11, and we have a 28-year-old son who's been through high school and university. So, you know, when I work with my daughter currently, I have to admit, and she admits it, math is not her favorite subject, but we try and make it as fun as possible. And the most important thing, you know, before we get started with math, is that we have all the materials that we needed, and we use as many tactile things as possible. So when we're doing fractions, I'm gonna, and you'll see these in the next few slides, I'll have my magnetic fraction strips on a cookie sheet so that we can move them around. And I will have my measuring cups, you know, a half to a quarter versus an eighth on the table so that we can compare those and look at those in real time. And in terms of writing things down, her favorite place to write is on the glass fronts of the cabinets in the kitchen or on the kitchen window. So, you know, if you're looking from the outside of the house in, you'll often see a whole bunch of things scribbled or drawings on the front window. But then again, it's such a difference from writing on the paper to writing on the whiteboard or the window. It absolutely changes her willingness and her engagement. And you know what? It's fine with me. She could write wherever she wants as long as I can wash it off after.
All right, next slide, please. So here are some manipulatives that you can actually purchase to help your kid with their math problems. Base 10 blocks are great for regrouping, for adding and subtracting multiple digits. Fraction strips is what Ruth was just talking about. You can also make these out of paper, and that in and of itself is a great activity. And it also helps with comparing. Kids can see, oh, 1/2 is bigger than 1/5, even though 2 is smaller than 5. Also, the Judy clock is great for learning how to tell time, and also those hands move. They have little handles so you can model elapsed time. The bingo counters are great for just counting, but also they're great for patterning, and they're also great for modeling equal groups for multiplication or division. A deck of cards, awesome for probability.
Hundreds of things to do with cards.
Oh, yeah. Also, like war, you can kind of adapt war to be, well, let's put 2 numbers down and let's add them together. And if I have a bigger sum than you, I win the hand. There's lots of ways to adapt games that you already play to include a little bit of math. And then the play Canadian money. Of course, this helps with learning how to skip count and count change, break change, and also just understanding what the different coins are and how much what their value is. All right, next slide. So you don't have to buy manipulatives. You can make manipulatives out of everyday objects. For example, you can build arrays, like in that Hot Wheels example, with any small object. So this one is showing a 4x4 array to show that 4 times 4 is 16. There's also M&Ms, Cheerios, gummy bears, candy, and Legos are a great way to model fractions, or you know, this is another tool for breaking up the math work. A lot of resistance. Well, hey, let's build Legos out of this problem. You know, your kid might want to just play with the Legos, but I think giving them that opportunity to connect the learning with play and setting it up in a structured way is really helpful. Okay, next slide. And I did want to mention that we are giving you a handout with all of those manipulatives and suggestions for how you could use them. And there is another handout with very practical ideas for everyday math. So there's math with money, math and cooking, and math and home improvement and decorating. So let's talk about the math with money first. You can estimate a bill while grocery shopping. So while you're waiting in line, hey, how much do you think all of this is going to cost? Do you think it's going to cost a little bit? How much more do you think it'll cost if we add another block of cheese and another carton of milk and another bunch of bananas? Getting them to understand estimation in a real way. Comparing prices to find the best value. This is huge for the grades 6, 7, and 8. They do this in a variety of ways every single year. And I think it becomes really real when they see how maybe you use unit price to buy the best value. Breaking change when shopping. Counting spare change from inside a purse or a wallet or a car. Calculating tip at restaurants. Determining the discount price. And creating a budget. I mean, you could adapt this for younger students, but I think this is a really important skill to learn before you become an adult. So I'd say if you have a son or daughter at home who is in maybe grades 7, 8, 9, this is probably a great time to get started with something like this. And it can be really simple and based on maybe an allowance or gift money or something like that.
I'm going to jump in there because last year for my daughter, starting in the summer, when we take a summer trip or a trip at all, there's always the expectation that she's going to get stuff while she's on her vacation or her trip, wherever we're traveling. And so for many years, it was sort of, well, you have to argue about, well, I already got you that fancy pencil that you really wanted, or I already got you that sweatshirt, and I think that's enough, and there were a lot of disappointment. So last year, I started a new regime, which was, I am going to give you $20 of fun money, spending money. You can spend it on whatever you want. And if we're away for a whole week, that $20 has to last you for wherever we go during that week. And it was incredible. So she was going into grade 5. She was 10 at the time, going into grade 5. And she was very, very careful about how she spent that $20. And it made for actually some really specific purchases, as opposed to just, Mommy, can I have that? Mommy, can I have that? Mommy, can I have that? Can I have that? And that, and that, and that. And at the end of that week, I was really proud of her because she had actually made some really specific decisions. She was holding two things in her hand, like a fancy giant pencil and some other stuffy, and she was like, well, if I buy this for $5.99, then I won't be able to buy this for whatever. And the thought process was exactly what I was hoping would happen, which was she understood the value of money. She understood that when it was done, and she wasn't going to get any more. So I parlayed that into a clothing budget for September, because my daughter loves to shop. And I said, okay, you've got X amount of dollars for the whole winter. And I said, I'm going to take care of winter boots and, winter jacket, the necessities. But all the extras that she wanted, I gave her a very set budget and we planned it out. And it was the same thing, which was any time that she wanted something, I said, well, is it in your budget? Do you have money left over? What do you want to spend on it? Is it worth $50? Or do you want to look for something that's only $20? And over that first term this year, it really changed her attitude towards money and what she asks for. And now it's like, that's it. We're on a budget. Every season she'll get a small budget. She can spend it at her discretion. And when she needs things, she'll have it. But when it's gone, it's gone. And it's been marvelous, actually.
That's great. All right, next slide. So math and cooking. So you'll get a worksheet, like I said, and it's got doubling recipes, halving recipes, experimenting with proportions, seeing how it changes the taste, measuring ingredients, reading the nutrition labels to figure out what does that 20% of my daily value actually mean, converting measurements, and considering the fractions of a plate for different food groups. And actually, I had to do some interesting math on Sunday. I made a cake, and the recipe called for unsalted butter, and I only had salted butter in the fridge. And instead of going to the grocery store and getting unsalted butter, I used a little trick that I read online that you can reduce the salt in the recipe by 1/4 teaspoon for every half cup of salted butter. So I was able to use that ratio to save myself time, and it still tasted delicious. All right, next slide. So the last one is math in home improvement and decorating. So creating a blueprint, estimating the length, area, perimeter, doing a scavenger hunt for items around the house. Like, can you find something that's 30 centimeters long? Can you find something that is 500 grams heavy? Calculating the cost of paint if you want to repaint a room. Building a model, measuring it, testing it for strength, using Legos to build a 3D model of what you want to redo, and also centering a picture vertically on the wall or horizontally between 2 points, like a piece of art, figuring out exactly where it should be on the wall so that it's in the middle. And I think Ruth wanted to share an example from her life.
Yeah, that's true. We are going to, as we are going to be home this summer and not at summer camp, one of the consolation prizes for my daughter was to redecorate her room. So once again, we're going to start with a budget, and we're going to look at, okay, you've got this amount of money to spend, and she's going to come up with a whole list of what her wish list would be. We're going to then do the research to find out what the cost of each of those things would be, including if she wants to repaint a wall, we're going to have to figure out the surface area of the wall and then figure out how much paint we're going to need for it, or if she wants a new carpet, what size of carpet and the cost of the carpet. So I'm planning on stretching this out for a good few weeks, hopefully throughout July, and little bit by little bit, and then by the time she hopefully goes back to school in September, she will have done a whole bunch of different math activities, but at the same time, gotten her wish, which is redoing her room.
Great. All right, next slide, please. So this slide is practical links to how to help with math. So in this period of at-home learning, you might find yourself having to instruct your son or daughter on their math homework. And here's some resources for you, as well as for your child. So Khan Academy, a very popular one. I would say most kids are very familiar with it. There's videos, they're all aligned to skills and standards and grade levels. And there's also practice problems with feedback. iExcel also is a very popular resource, and it's just practice problems. You get 10 for free daily, but if you have an account, then you get an unlimited amount. And I know for clients at Ruth Rumack's Learning Space, we do provide a subscription to iExcel included in your lesson package. So this is really a great tool because it'll give the students feedback. It'll tell them if it's right or wrong. And then it'll also have a link that says, do you need help? Click here for a video. So I use it a lot. I really like it. Math is Fun is a resource for parents, I would say, mostly because it talks you through how to do a problem. Because let's be honest, sometimes you don't remember the skill that your student has on their homework, and that's totally fine, no shame. The Academics is a great place to find math games, also with feedback. Math Antics is a video website, so there's this math teacher who goes through different concepts, and he's very goofy, and it's pretty silly. Nerd Study, it doesn't have its own website, but it is a channel on YouTube, and it's specifically for high school, which there's not a lot of high school channels out there, and this one is excellent. All right, next slide, please. So your key takeaways, first of all, let's just acknowledge that math phobia is real. The avoidance, the pushback, the
tears,
the tears, yeah, those don't take those personally. It might be a manifestation of real fear and anxiety. Model growth mindset for your child. Help them to understand that if it's a struggle now, it won't be a struggle forever. They can learn this. They can grow. Remind your child that anytime they learn something new, anything in life, there will be a short period of discomfort, and encourage that persistence to push through it. And when you help with homework, ask the guiding questions. Remember to make it fun. Tell your child how you use math in your life and try maybe one of the everyday math at home ideas. I know things are a little crazier than normal, so I think a realistic goal would just be like, okay, I'm going to try just one of these ideas. All right, and next slide, please. So I'm so excited to be teaching this course starting in June 3rd, Wednesdays and Fridays from 11 to 12. It's offered online. It's specifically for students in grades 4 to 6. And I actually think that time might be 3 to 4. So it is after school. But students will learn how to apply a variety of problem-solving strategies. They'll break down word problems with the cubes strategy, which is a very specific strategy that helps them make sense of the problem and identify keywords, necessary operations, model the problem with drawings and diagrams, and you can register now. I'm very excited about this course because I will be teaching it. I absolutely think that every child can do word problems, and I see it as this real barrier. And even students who don't normally struggle with the calculation, oh, it is 10 to 12, thank you. Even students who don't struggle with the calculation part, sometimes will feel like the reading comprehension holds them back a little bit. And I just think bridging that gap is just so important. And word problems aren't going away. You see them until grade 12. So building that confidence early on is key. All right, next slide, please. So Ruth, I'm going to hand it over to you. Oh, you're muted, Ruth.
Trying to keep the cooking sounds out of our webinar. That's what I'm trying to do. So thank you, Sabrina. Those are fabulous ideas, and we can certainly start a conversation. If anybody would like to, we can open up the microphones in a moment. I'll tell you quickly about our one-to-one online math instruction. It's K to 12 and even beyond. And one of the things that we really work on in our math lessons is that building of confidence of very strategic and scaffolded steps, working towards mastery, making a child feel strong and confident in the work that they're doing before moving on to the next step, breaking things into very small, manageable parts, and above all, keeping it fun and light and finding ways to make it interactive and dynamic, even when we are online. That's a big deal. What else can I tell you? When we do our one-to-one work, it's very personalized and strategic to that child's needs based on their learning profile and their learning style and what they're coming to the table with. So we do an assessment first to make sure we know where they're at and what we need to do in order to get them to that next level. I would like to say, at this point, overall, math, as we know, is a very important part of our daily life. And it is that the goal here is to build confidence in ourselves as teachers, educators, and parents, and to be able to transfer that confidence to our kids. And, if we've grown up with a lack of confidence in math, we want to make sure that we can kind of stop that cycle before it gets to the next generation. And sometimes revisiting that fear for ourselves as adults will go a long way and showing that, I don't feel very confident with this either, but let's figure it out together. Let's work through this. Let's break it down, and we're going to try a few different ways until we get there. And again, as we've mentioned before, patience, patience, patience. Take a deep breath, take a break if you need to, and then come back to it. I mean, even the most seasoned educator sometimes needs to take a breath and a break. And sometimes we see problems on our desks from our students that they bring in from school or beyond. And, we have to scratch our heads too a little bit. But modeling how you solve that problem is the best way to show how to get through something for our kids. Does anybody have any questions at this point? I'm going to go back to the questions that you sent in. A few people sent in questions before the seminar began or the webinar began. And one of them is the fear brought on by anxiety and then blanking out during tests. and how to overcome that. That's a really, really tough one, because again, you know, there's so many variables when you're in a test. When you walk into the test, you have to think about, how have I prepared? Have I prepared enough? Have I prepared thoroughly enough? Then there's a situation where you sit down at the test and the first thing that you see is the one thing that you didn't understand, and then it feels like everything else, you know, flies out the window and you have a very hard time capturing that information. Well, the way that our brains are working at that moment is it puts us in a fight or flight situation. That anxiety raises our cortisol levels, which is a hormone. It's a, you know, a process chemical in the brain that, in fact, what we call flipping our lid, where we go from the reasonable, rational brain to our lizard brain, which is inside, which is that fear, fight, flight, or freeze moment. And when we have flipped our lid and we're now in that lizard brain, that irrational brain, then it's very hard to get it back. So we need to practice with our kids different techniques, perhaps breathing techniques, relaxation techniques, ways of calming themselves down so that their cortisol levels come back down, and then they are able better to attend to the question. And that can be as simple as closing your eyes, putting your pencil down. I tell my kids to take 3 or 4 deep breaths in through the nose and out through the mouth, and just try and relax their shoulders, relax from the top of their heads down, and then to try and attempt it again. So practicing that over time, of course, that technique may not work the first time, but being aware that you get to that point of anxiety where you just can't rationalize any longer and you can't get back to what you knew. It's a process over time of implementing some relaxation techniques and probably some talking to themselves, like, I can do this. This is something that I practice. I'm going to maybe skip the first question and look at the next one. So if not only we give our students relaxation techniques and ways of calming themselves down, soothing self-talk, but we also give them very clear strategies of what to do in that situation, and perhaps even role model what to do in that situation. Play it out beforehand. You know, what would happen if your first question is the question that you don't understand? What are you going to do? You can go one way, where you throw your pencil across the room and melt down, or put your head on the desk and start to cry, or we can follow these steps, and we practice those steps over and over again until that comes naturally and you don't really have to think about it. And when you're in that situation, you just innately follow those steps. Sabrina, do you have any other suggestions for anxiety during tests?
I would say just helping kids to recognize when they did flip the lid and when they are in that lizard brain state, because admitting that to yourself is the first step, I think.
And then following through with whatever you practiced in terms of getting yourself back on track.
Exactly.
And I think if you have kids who are doing this repeatedly, you want to definitely have a conversation with the classroom teachers. You want to make sure that the classroom teacher is aware of it. Sometimes kids who are freaking out in a math test are doing it so silently that nobody else notices. And then they hand in their test and they go to the bathroom and cry their eyes out, or whatever happens next. But having that communication with your classroom teacher is very important, and working out a strategy with the classroom teacher. You know, maybe your child, and we have to look at other variables too. Are there any learning disabilities or learning challenges? Is there any focus and attention challenge? Are there any memory or working memory issues? Those variables will also impact how a student takes a test. And therefore, we have to really work with that child and the teacher. We come together to support that child from all fronts. And that's part of what we do at Ruth for Math's Learning Space as well, which is making sure that we are supporting the student, that the student is being supported at the school. We put in some advocacy time as well and make sure that everybody's on the same page. Any other questions? There were some questions about making it fun, which I think we've answered. We've got lots of ideas for that. And then how to motivate when your child is overwhelmed. I think, again, taking it back a step, putting the paper and a pencil away, putting the textbook away, if you as the parent understand what the core of the particular concept is, if we're talking about really simple things like adding and subtracting, well, that can be done while you're playing with the super Hot Wheels cars or stuffies, or, you know, as we talked about, using Cheerios or food. Going back to that basic when it doesn't look like a math problem is going to be your best way of reaching a child who is overwhelmed and who is really pushing back. So sneaking it in, kind of the way we sneak in vegetables, you know, to a child's diet if they don't like it, we have to sneak in the math in a way that is more fun. And then really build their confidence and give them as much praise as we can in a genuine way, so that they feel that they get it. And, you know, when they've got it, and they're going to move on to the next.